Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Brian Pavona, a partner with BKD CPAs and Advisors and your First Illinois chapter president-elect. I'm so excited to be here today with a very special panel of healthcare leaders. Our panelists have not only navigated a successful career in healthcare, but have also served our country in the armed forces and are honored veterans. We've heard from all of you, our members, on how much you appreciate and want more relative to the content around career progression, growth, and mentorship. And so who better to help us think through career progression and navigating change than our panel today. We'll get started in just a moment, but first, we'd like to recognize our valued chapter partners without whom today's content would not be possible. So first of all, to our platinum partners, BDO, BKD, and RSM, thank you for sponsoring at the highest level. To our important gold member partners, Claro Healthcare, Access One, Care Advisors, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Powers and Moon, Olive, Russell Investments, LJ Ross and Associates, Moss Adams, and Guidehouse, thank you. To our silver partners, Harris & Harris, Robert Half, Enthrive, Medallia, and Innovista Health Solutions, we thank you. And to our bronze partners, including CloudMed, Enable Comp, Protivity, Plant Moran, Salud Revenue Partners, the law offices of Stevenson, Acquisto, and Coleman, and Vine Medical. To all of our partners, your continued support makes great programs like this one possible. So thank you. And we will be launching CPE polling questions throughout the webinar for those that would like continued professional education. And in fact, we'll launch the first polling question now. And as we do so, let's get started on our panel discussion. I'm excited to introduce four panelists today. Ivan Samstein, the Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of UChicago Medicine. Kelsey Nudie, a nurse and Associate Chief Nursing Officer and Executive Director of Nursing Operations at Northwest Community Healthcare, which is now part of North Shore University Health System. John Borkin, Manager of Financial Operations at Sinai Chicago. And Ben Corbeni, IMH Director of Specialty Revenue Cycle at UChicago Medicine. Thank you, panel, for joining today. And hopefully I've said your names correctly, but I know that I won't be able to do your bios justice. So I'm going to let each of you introduce yourselves to the group. So John, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Thanks, Brian. My name's John Borkin. As Brian noted, I'm a manager of financial operations for Sinai Health Systems, and I primarily am responsible for the Sinai Medical Group and Schwab Rehabilitation Hospital. Been with Sinai for almost 4 years, and prior to that, I was at Presence/Amita for almost 5, and prior to that, Advocate almost 5. My military experience, I was a yeoman, which is a secretary aboard a nuclear-powered submarine out of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and my career spanned 1983 to 1987. And thanks, Brian.
Thanks so much, John. Kelsey, please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Kelsey Knudi. I'm the Associate Chief Nursing Officer at Northwest Community Hospital. I currently oversee nursing operations in a variety of mostly inpatient areas, case management, and utilization review. I have been with my organization for 2.5 years, and previously, like John, I was with the Presence and Amita systems for about 8 years. Prior to that, I was in the Navy for 8 years as a nurse corps officer, and I have my MPH from Northern Illinois University and MBA from Benedictine. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Kelsey. All right, Ben, welcome.
Hi, my name is Ben Pabeni. As Brian mentioned, I'm with University of Chicago, Ingles Memorial Hospital. My position there is the Director of Specialty Revenue Cycle. I've been with University of Chicago for about 6 months now, and pretty much my job is to oversee the revenue operations for the service lines, seeing a specialty, which is home care and hospice, same-day surgery, behavioral health, and occupational medicine. Prior to that, I worked at the VA Veterans Hospital for 11 years. The last 7 years was as the regional revenue manager, oversaw the revenue operations of 10 of the VA hospitals within the Midwest. And prior to that, I spent 4 years working as the revenue manager at Hines VA. And prior to that, I was in the military. I was in the Navy for 8 years, from 2000 to 2008, as a dental assistant and a hospital medic or hospital corpsman.
Well, great. Thanks for that. All right, and then we'll turn it over to Ivan. And Ivan, I'm hearing you got 3 Navy servicemen and women so far. Why don't you tell us about you?
So Ivan Sampson here. I represent the non-Navy contingent on this call. I spent a good portion of my life in the Army Reserves and National Guard. I was a medic when I was younger in the Army Reserves, and then got in later and commissioned in the Army National Guard and actually deployed to Afghanistan as an intelligence officer with an infantry unit. In terms of my career on the civilian side, I've been lucky to be able to do a lot of different types of things in my career. Started my career at one of the bond rating agencies, migrated to investment banking, and worked in investment banking for roughly a decade. Took military leave in the middle of that time period, and then chose to move to operational finance with CFO at Cook County Government here in Chicago before joining University of Chicago. I was university CFO for a number of years. I recently moved over to UChicago Medicine and like Ben, work at the UChicago Medicine entity. But for me, the military has been kind of interspersed throughout my civilian career as well.
Well, great. Thank you so much for all of you for joining and for your service, both first with the armed services and then in healthcare. Ivan, if we stay with you for just a minute, your path is interesting in that you started in the service and as a medic, but I heard you touched on several different industries. So very interested about your career progression and maybe what you've been able to take from each step to use in your current role.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say a couple of things. I think that fundamentally, every organization is a little different in the way in which it seeks to motivate its talent. And I think that's probably the main thing I would take away. So if you think about, Wall Street, it's a pretty, basic mechanism for motivation. It's most comp is a variable comp. I worked in a department where tended to be about 5% of the department was laid off in any given year. And that drives and incents certain behaviors to drive a high performance culture. Conversely, if you think about, the medical environment, it's probably much more similar, I would argue, actually, to the military environment. I'll come to that, how we think about motivating and inspiring great teams in the military. But, and then there was, and government, and in government, I would say that a lot of the motivation was, historically, to be candid, was around the pension system and the retention associated with a mechanism of retirement compensation that really attracted a workforce that would be very stable in the long run. But I think in the military, you really, I don't know what others' experience were, but I think I always saw that the intent was to motivate. It wasn't through your compensation. You didn't have bonuses. It was really designed around how do you motivate people to inspire great teams. It was to be part of something bigger than oneself, to lead by example. Later in life, when I commissioned, I was in the officer corps, and I think a big tenet to that you talk about almost every 5 minutes during OCS is lead from the front, lead by example, eat last after your men have eaten, et cetera. And I think that's a very different environment than, for instance, I saw on Wall Street. But I think the real point I'd make is that I think there's probably a lot of similarity that many of us in the nonprofit mission-based orientation would ascribe to some similarities to what you think about in the military, where the real goal is to motivate teams by inspiring them to do great things, to be part of something bigger than oneself. And I hope that resonates, at least for some of the people listening.
Really appreciate that, Ivan. And I knew I had read up on you, and I knew the government and the academic, but I missed the Wall Street. So that was a good dichotomy there. Kelsey, maybe turning to you, if I may, tell us a little bit more about your career progression and also your current role.
Sure. So I'm a nursing operations girl. I have dabbled in some other things, but keep coming back. And so I think this is truly my calling. Going into the Navy as an officer, I was exposed to quite a bit of some leadership skill development early on, but I'm definitely able to use that and translate that a lot deeper now in the current role that I'm in. Totally second what Ivan said. The most important thing I think that I've been able to translate is the value of teamwork and the ability to create high-functioning teams in really stressful situations. I was a combat trauma flight nurse in Iraq and did some flight nursing out of Europe as well, and have really been able to apply a lot of those skills learned during wartime into supporting our teams on the front line in this current pandemic. So I'm very grateful for that type of a skill set that I was able to develop and translate, I feel like, into the civilian world. I feel like it's really come together in this role that I'm currently in. Also, recognizing mental health needs as we've continued through the pandemic as well. My nursing teams are very tired. They're very burnt out and stressed, and I'm finding myself recognizing things that I would recognize in other nursing teams that would come back from deployments and what their needs were. So that's been a big focus of ours lately. But I think having that background and that skill set has allowed me to identify, some of those needs now in the civilian world. I think the other thing that has been really helpful that I definitely learned in the military was the ability to be flexible, and not meaning that the military itself is flexible, it's not, right? But how we handle new directives, initiatives, and missions, being able to kind of turn on a dime in order to serve the mission and the needs of our community and our patients now in the civilian world that I'm in. So thank you.
That's really great, Kelsey. And maybe staying with you, we were chatting a little bit before we went live here that you're also an HFMA member, and I think that a lot of our audience is going to be the typical HFMA membership of accountants, finance folks, and revenue cycle. Just wondering on how you use the chapter and the resources, and then also how do you interact with your finance folks?
Yeah, great. So I'm fairly new HFMA member. I have just recently completed my MBA, but I use the internet page, the resources there for quite a few things. I'm new to the case management side of things and definitely have used the denials forums and some of the other payment and reimbursement forums to access additional information and reach out to members. There's also a diversity, equity, and inclusion forum that's new that I've seen. Just those forums have been really great. There's also current news and hot topics that come out. You can access them through the internet page or the listservs that you can identify, and then some other tools. So I'm looking forward to continuing getting more acquainted with my HFMA chapter, but early on have really been impressed with what's out there available to us as members.
That's really great. Thanks for that. All right, so we're gonna move on to John and Ben here, but first, just for those folks who are looking for CPE, we're gonna launch our second polling question here. Give you a second there to fill that out. And as we do so, Ben and John, I'm gonna start, Ben, with you first, and then John, I'll have you follow up. Ben, just interested in what you've heard so far from the other panelists, but for you specifically also, what were some of those skills that you learned in the service, and how was your transition from service in the armed services into healthcare?
Okay. Similar to what Ivan and Kelsey mentioned, but for the most part, I would highlight that the attention to detail and due diligence, just given the work you have to do in the military, that attention to detail is critical, because without that, you can either hurt yourself or hurt a team member, and also being in a clinical setting, you always have to make sure that, you're doing things the way it should be. So attention to detail is a big part of my job, as a military personnel, as well as working in a clinical setting. So that the ability to follow as well as to lead, with the military, it's all about ranking. It's a hierarchy. In some situations, you're leading, and then majority of the time, you have to follow orders and instructions, and you have to be able to foster a good team dynamic. So those would be the items that I would highlight as experiences that was pretty much a seamless transition to healthcare. And in my case, working as a dental assistant in a hospital common, and now working in a hospital in an administrative setting, pretty much everything I had to do in a clinical setting applied. It was just, having those skill set transferred from clinical to administrative. But for the most part, the attention to detail, ability to, foster a high functioning team, and, leading when you need to lead, and following and, listening to your team when it's needed to gain that understanding when need be. Hopefully I answered all your questions. Did I miss anything?
I think that's great. Thank you. And as I turn it over to John, I'm going to ask you the same thing, just to talk about, your progression and the skill sets you learned. But before I do, or the rest of the panel, be thinking about maybe what's one thing you miss about maybe a structure in the armed services that maybe you wish you had in your current job. And I'll ask everybody to answer that. But John, tell us about your transition, and what skill sets from the services are you using now?
Sure. For me, Ben hit it on the head. It's attention to detail. Being in finance, it really matters, because our mistakes, while are not life-threatening, can create bad decisions or cost us money if we make some type of mistake. And so I find that attention to detail is key. The other thing that I did, and that I've kept with me, is the discipline. The discipline of, I have to be somewhere at a certain time, and I'm expected to be there. I've noticed as I've gone through my career that there are others that don't feel that way. And it's okay. I've learned to adapt to them. And that's the other thing that I think the military did a great job for me, is that teaching me how to adapt, or as I like to say, improvise and adapt. And that's what we need to do. But for me, it was the discipline and the attention to detail that have really helped me, I believe, in my career. Sometimes it's a bit of a detriment on the attention to detail because I notice everything. So that's somewhat of a blessing and a curse, but I look at it more of a blessing because, again, in finance, I find that having a great attention to detail has allowed me to have a skill set that suits very well for healthcare finance and decision support. And one of the best compliments I ever got, it was somewhat backhanded, but it was pretty cool. A CFO I was working for told my boss that the CFO wished he had half of my analytical ability, but that I had half of my boss's personality. Because I tend to be, straightforward and direct, and that's what I was taught in the military, was to answer a direct question with a direct answer. And to my detriment, at certain times, it's been a bad thing. But those who know me at least appreciate it, and I've had some great mentors along the way who have pulled me aside and said, "John, do you know what you just did?" And then once I found out, I was horrified. But it's nice to have people that support you, and I think that having been in the military and people know that they appreciate that, and sometimes will, not that they look the other way, but say, "Hey, maybe the military taught you this way. We need to teach you this way."
Appreciate that. Thanks so much, John. And I'll open it up to the panelists. If is anyone else feeling as though there's an element of the service that they miss or wish that they would have in their daily life now? Kelsey, I might look to you first. Anything come to mind?
I say frequently, my teams know this, that as much as I disliked some of this, I think, when I was in the military, I really miss having standard operating procedures for every single thing. I mean, we had it for literally how to tie our shoes, thought that was kind of silly, but totally understand the value in it now, right? If we're all doing everything in the best way we know how now, it just makes things a lot more fluid. So that's been, I think, my most difficult transition into the civilian world, is not having a set of orders for every single thing.
Appreciate that.
I'll just comment that, my own thoughts about, and, I've talked to a number of veteran things over the years. I think that, when you're in the military, you have a shared experience with a lot of the colleagues that you're working with, not everyone appreciates who hasn't served in the military. And I mention that because I think what many of us will sometimes miss is the camaraderie we have with, and the shared experiences, particularly for those of us who served overseas or in difficult deployments. And so, I think the reason I mention that is I think everybody sort of misses some of those colleagues and comrades that you had. And I think it's really important to think about how you connect with other professionals who have similar interests and similar experiences, affinity groups, other elements that you can do to both, be an ally and resource sometimes when a colleague needs it, and vice versa. And so I think, when you're transitioning, or when you're in a civilian environment, I've gone kind of back and forth, deploying in the midst of my Wall Street career overseas, coming back. I think the main thing that I would impart that I miss, and that I think you have to actively seek out, is sort of affinity groups and other ways to connect with colleagues who have a shared experience, because there is some uniqueness, I think, to some of the things that some of us who spent a good chunk of our adult lives in service experience.
So I agree to what both what Ivan and Kelsey mentioned. Having that structure in place and knowing what you have to do every day and everything pretty much spelled out. I do miss that, and also the camaraderie, because it's not just individuals you work with now. It's pretty much, it's a family. So you build that long-lasting relationships with people that are scattered all over the country, in some cases in different continents. And yes, just having that camaraderie, that brotherhood, friendship, pretty much a family unit. So that's one thing I do miss with being in the military.
I appreciate you all sharing that, and I think that's going to resonate a lot with members, especially right now, where for many of them they've been working either remote or hybrid for going on a year and a half, and so I know that it's harder than ever to connect with your peers. Ivan, you said the affinity groups, the networking, the mentorships, and so to continue to put yourself out there and try to make those connections is going to be extremely important. And it's nice to hear how it's all helped you in your career progression so far. Ivan, I guess, I'll come back to you. You've had probably the most transitions and the most different transitions than anyone here. And so, if you have advice for folks that are starting a new position, whether it's moving from within healthcare, from position A to position B, or entering into healthcare, what advice and recommendations do you have for folks out there that's maybe starting something new?
Yeah, so it's a nice way of saying I seem to change what I'm doing every 5 years. Hopefully this current job will stick, is what I tell everyone. I've been pretty lucky that I've been able to do a lot of really different things. I said earlier sort of my career trajectory, but I spent 5 years on the credit rating agency, a decade or so in investment banking, but left in the middle, and for military leave. And of course, that firm went through multiple mergers. And so the firm at the end didn't look a single thing like the group I came in. And then 5 years plus in government, another 4 years in academia, and relatively recent. So I keep saying I hope that my career in the medical organization will stick. Some people joke I can't keep a job, but I've been lucky, and I think that in life there's some luck and position helps you as much as anything else. But what I would say is that for me, I think when you're thinking about doing new things, I think there's two things. One is applying yourself completely and fundamentally, and entirely to it is really critical, because if you're pivoting or making something different, doing something different than what you're doing before, the only way you really will get good at it is really going above and beyond. And the second thing I say is, always, being flexible and nimble. When I came back from my deployment, some colleagues said, what was it like? And, it goes back to my earlier point. It's hard to really have a meaningful conversation, to your colleagues on Wall Street when, one day you're working on Wall Street, the next day you're calling in mortar strikes in the Mail Valley. It's a very different experience. And so what I would say is that, I think all of us have a much bigger capacity to adapt and be nimble than we really realize. You kind of do what's in front of you and what you need to do to succeed at it. And I think the commonality is going above and beyond, completely, immersing yourself in something to make a transition, because we all, when colleagues are like, well, how do you do it? I don't know. I mean, one day I was on Wall Street, the next day I was calling in more, you're certainly not going to sit back and say, well, this feels too different, I'm not going to do it. Certainly not, in certain experiences. So I think the real key is, how deeply immerse yourself you are into something you're looking at, number one, and number two, recognizing that your capacity to change is probably far greater than you expect. And so, that means you got to be nimble, you got to be flexible. And, that's obviously pretty general thoughts I'm offering, but I think they hold true. And so happy to expound more if anyone reaches out to me offline as well.
Really appreciate that. I know that'll resonate well with many of our members. We're just about halfway through. I'm going to administratively just launch the third polling question for those folks who would like to receive CPE today. And as we do so, Kelsey, I think we're going to pivot to you, if that's okay. And, often in the workforce of healthcare, the workforce itself doesn't always mirror the populations that they serve in terms of diversity. One area in particular is the shortage of women in leadership positions. And I think as both the armed services and the healthcare industry continue to focus on increasing its number of diverse leaders and women in leadership, just wondering if you have any thoughts about what the healthcare organizations need to do in particular to focus in on women's progression into leadership.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it's been really great to see all of the diversity, equity, and inclusion work that is really taking off across the healthcare landscape. It's something that I'm very passionate about, and I think that our healthcare organizations really need to embrace that work and the philosophy of creating our leadership teams to more closely match the workforce that we are supporting, as well as our populations that we're serving. So for healthcare, really making sure that we have representation across leadership positions that match those communities that we're serving. I think that we as leaders need to make sure we're actively working on succession planning and elevating individuals, no matter what their background is, as we identify new potential leaders, and really doubling down and investing on them and giving them opportunities to grow and develop from early on. It's an area that we're pretty passionate about here.
Thanks for sharing that with us. Ben, I'm going to go to you. For somebody transitioning into the healthcare finance world, what advice would you have for them? And what resources have you found most helpful for you to be able to do your job?
Okay, I would say one is do the research, figure out if this is what you truly want to do, find a mentor, someone, if you're in school, maybe one of your professors, if you're still in the military, making that transition, just really finding, a mentor within, your leadership, whether it's a senior enlisted officer or an officer to help with navigating what needs to be done. In my case, I had several mentors. Initially, I was making a transition from being an enlisted to an officer, and that's how I started out with healthcare administration, because that was the goal, was to become an officer in the Navy. That didn't pan out the way I wanted to, and as Ivan mentioned, just being able to be nimble and pivot at a dime, when I saw that wasn't, something that would come to fruition, I had to pivot and start making plans for life after the military. So during that time, I was in college going through grad school. So one of my professors, I'll never forget, Dr. Evans, pretty much became a mentor to me. And he was really tough on me. He was hard on me. He was an officer in the Air Force. So given the military background and things of that nature, he didn't cut me any slack. He was really hard on me compared to everyone else. So that pretty much was, in my case, that was good for me, having a mentor that was real and gave me the realistic version of what to expect and not sugarcoating anything. That really helped. And that's really what I would say. It's know what you want to do after military, find a mentor. In terms of other resources that could help, it's going to the VA and getting resources from the VA. Sometimes they have job fairs and programs to help veterans or military personnel transition to life after the military. So that's something I would say would be helpful.
I appreciate you bringing that up, Ben, because as I stand here and I wrote down some of the themes that I heard from whether it was John or Kelsey or Ivan or you, Ben, and I heard over and over again, teamwork, the ability to be flexible, adaptive, or improvise, attention to detail, discipline, standard operating procedures, being nimble, and then go above and beyond or be all in. And so if I think about all this, it's an obvious why we all would want to have veterans on our teams. I'm interested in, though, what do you believe may need to be some of those resources that veterans may need to have in making that transition, and what advice might you have for somebody who's working with somebody who is previously a veteran? So Ivan, I might start with you, if that's okay, if you have some thoughts there.
Yeah, well, I'll say a couple of things. So first of all, just and I'll piggyback on what Ben was just saying a few seconds ago. First of all, there's a lot of we should be, healthcare finance may not be something you're thinking about naturally, but there's a lot of demand in the field right now. I think a lot of people have heard about this great resignation term that we're generally talking about. But there's a lot of turnover and a lot of key roles in a lot of organizations, and like many things. It does take money to finance our healthcare system in the U.S. And so that means there is a large number of talented individuals that every organization is going to need. And there's a breadth of different kinds of healthcare organizations. The first thing I would just say is that there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for the individuals, identifying what it is that interests you, thinking about, what are the skills you want to get, whether it's in your professional experience, internship experience, or your educational experience that will position you to get what you want. I mean, I think in everything in life, if you set goals, you have a really good chance of achieving them. If you don't set concrete goals, we tend not to organically just arrive at our definition of success if we didn't actually take the time to say, hey, what do I want? And what's my path from where I sit today to how to get there? And I think there are a number of different ways to do that. And I think there's a lot of demand. So, and I think the skills, I think a number of us talk about why the skills that many of us learn in the military, we think would make other people who learn those same skills successful in their careers. But I think the real key for the individual is to focus on what is it I'm most interested in. And, internships or other experiences, sometimes they're partly to tell you what you don't like to do as much as they are to tell you what you do like to do. I've done a lot of really different things about every 5 years of my career, and I've enjoyed them all. And each one I kind of learned, well, what were the parts of that job that I really liked, and what are the parts that I liked a little less, and how do I think about my next experience, focusing more on the things that I really am looking for. So I would encourage everyone who's thinking about making that transition in career to kind of think through, get with a mentor, get with other individuals to kind of talk about what are the different pieces of the healthcare finance landscape, where's my interest seem to be greatest, and what's the greatest intersection with my own skills and interests, set goals, and then use the experiences that you can to get you to where you need to be. That's the first thing I would say. Second thing then to your question was, what about individuals who are hiring and how do they think about veterans? So I think in general, you will find that most veterans have very strong organizational skills because of some of the things that Ben and Kelsey were talking about a few minutes ago. I think you will see that most veterans are very strong on taking direction, and particularly those who serve as a non-commissioned officer or commissioned officer on giving direction and clear and direct feedback. So I would say most important would be direct feedback. I think all of us, whether you're a veteran or not, thrive off of I think we tend to not always give us direct feedback, particularly when it's negative to folks, and sometimes we should as managers. And I think it's really important that we do that. And even more so, I think, because most veterans are probably accustomed to it. I think in their performance review cycle in the military, it's a little different than performance review cycle in civilian work. And I think most people will appreciate that regular and sustained direct feedback. And again, to be honest, it's not really that different from the rest of the civilian workforce, but I do think because of the manner in which the performance appraisal regime in the military does differ a little bit. So there's plenty more I could say, but I think those are probably the key things I'd start with.
Appreciate that. I'm seeing some nodding heads affirmative. So, but Kelsey, anything else to add in terms of either thoughts on the discussion so far, or resources that may need to be needed for veterans coming into the workforce?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of resources available. It's been 12 years, I think, since I got out, but have some friends who are wrapping up their careers, their 20 years, and just speaking with them, I'm hearing there's a lot of resources out there. So just really understanding what's available to you, what kind of transition pieces are in place. I like, Ivan, how you mentioned finding out what you like, finding out what you don't like, volunteer for something in an area that you may want to go into, and be open to things that might seem like a stretch outside of your wheelhouse. I think participating in committees and organizations as I transitioned, and I'm still considering myself transitioning to a civilian. Sometimes I've found that participating in certain organizations and volunteering for certain things has helped me find that affinity group and those people that are like-minded and have some of those shared past experiences. So those have helped me, professionally and personally as I've transitioned, and I think that there's a lot out there that people can tap into.
Great. John, just as you're hearing everything here, what are your thoughts in terms of advice you'd give for those transitioning in healthcare, or if somebody working with a veteran, maybe what resources they may need?
Well, in terms of transitioning, I kind of agree with what's been said. It's, really realizing what you want to do and, how you can fit it. I was a yeoman, so I was a secretary. I typed up patrol reports. It had nothing to do with finance, but the military helped me the most is, the attention to detail and working as being part of a team. I remember that most from boot camp was, I felt that boot camp just taught me how to play well with others, really. And I think that's what as you're moving from the military into a civilian career, look at internships, look at opportunities. As Ivan mentioned, look at what you like and what you don't like. I'll admit there is one part of my job I hate, and it's a big part, and that's budgeting. But I've learned through, from my military experience, that there's always going to be something we don't like. So find a way that you can like it. Find those that I think it was Kelsey who mentioned it, who are like-minded, and find out what what makes them tick? How did they become good at it? And then in terms of working with veterans, I think it's recognizing, trying to put yourself in their shoes, trying to recognize what was their motivation for the military. All of us had a reason for going in. And then understanding that, and then, how can they be the best teammate? And then, that's where I think with military people the most, it's being a good teammate. We're all used to working on teams and their shared experiences. And then the better the team, I think the better the experience.
Great. And Ben,
And I hope
anything else
that
to add?
answered the question.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything else to add to that. Pretty much, Kelsey, John, and Ivan pretty much covered everything. But the teamwork is a big thing. Looking into hiring veterans, as Ivan mentioned, and everyone else echoed. It's knowing, with veterans, we're used to working in a team, and that's in any given situation, that's a skill set that it's needed. Having that structure and understanding, listening and taking instructions, and speaking up when needed. Yes, granted, been in the military, it's a hierarchy and a ranking structure. You're not necessarily encouraged to talk back, but for the most part, we do. So just knowing, when it comes to getting the work done, you have individuals that will get the work done, and given the training and everything we've been taught in the military. We're always committed to whatever it is we're doing, to the job that we have at hand. And I think Ivan mentioned this earlier. Everything we do, or the idea of the work we do, or the text that's given to us is bigger than us. It's not just a job. It's going in with the mindset of getting the job done, and having that commitment to getting it done and doing it right the first time, So I think that's all I can say about that. Everyone else did a good job of covering it. So
Great. Thanks so much, Ben. All right, panelists, we're down to our last two questions. The second to last here is, and some of you've touched on this, but how important have mentors been in your career progression? And what do you think makes a good mentor? As I give you a minute to think about that, we're going to launch our last and final polling question for those that are looking for that continuous professional education. And, Ben, I see you're still off mute, so I might start with you on the mentorship question.
I think I touched on this earlier with having a mentor and having several mentors throughout my career. It's really one, having someone that is willing to guide you and give you the right information, and understanding your career path, and just providing you the information and the knowledge to get to that career path. And if for whatever reason, it doesn't work out the way you see fit, or the outcome you were looking for, it's having that ability to switch up and pivot. I think that's been one of the themes throughout the conversation today. It's understanding what works for you and what doesn't work for you. So having someone to guide you through those steps, and not necessarily holding your hand to do it, but having conversations about it and having those discussions, and helping you see other perspectives. That's always a good thing. So I would say that's been the biggest thing for me, is having individuals that I know I can go speak to, whether it be a direct supervisor, someone outside of the organization, or whatever the case may be, but someone they're willing to give you a different perspective or a different outlook on how you've been viewing things.
Great. Thanks for that, Ben. Ivan, I might go to you next and just get your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I have a slightly different take than what Ben alluded to. What I've generally thought about for mentorship is been through professional organizations. That it's and maybe this is not different than what Ben was saying, but I have enjoyed in every area that I've worked to have the camaraderie of colleagues with shared experiences. And so, when I was in government finance, when I was CFO for Cook County government, it was the Government Finance Officers Association, or GFOA. When I was at the university CFO, it was NACUBO, or the National Association for College and University Business Officers. And here, since transitioning or walking across Ellis Avenue, for those who know Chicago, from one side of campus to the other, it's HFMA and organizations like it. And there are a lot of different forums and different venues, but I think it's really important when you kind of know what you're interested in to seek out those groups of people with similar experiences and learn from each other. And people benefit from your experience and your skills sometimes as well, sometimes more than you expect. And I was on one of these calls and I talked to one of my colleagues in the Cuba organization about something, and he said, "Oh, I really appreciate such and such that you shared." And I said, "Really, it's funny. I always thought of me as more of a taker than a giver in those meetings." But sometimes you'd be surprised. Maybe occasionally you're saying something that someone else actually finds of interest too. I guess but I do really think that those type of organizations are really important in your career. When I met Brian the first time, he said, as taking your role, some of your teammates on the U Chicago Medicine finance team are kind of interested to know, will you be supportive? And I said, absolutely. I mean, I think it's really critical that we all seek out those opportunities to learn from each other, to benefit from each other. And I would say that kind of never ends. I benefit tremendously from the individuals I interact with in these kind of organizations. And I encourage those who are thinking about a career to start thinking about participating in HFMA and other things, because I think it's a good opportunity to go back to what I was saying earlier, figure out what you like, what you don't like, learn about what's out there, and the like. So that's my general response, Brian.
I love it. And that was a big plug, I think, for HFMA. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you didn't
Kelsey,
even pay me to say it. So.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Kelsey, again, a little different career path for you. Just some final thoughts on mentorship before we go to the lightning round of the last question.
Yeah, I've been really blessed to have, formal mentors, and I'd say some informal mentors across a variety of areas, and financial mentors. I mean, coming in from transitioning from nursing in the military to nursing and as a leader in a healthcare organization, I've been really lucky to have some really good CFO mentors across the last 12 years of my career. So I just continue to tell people, own your leadership journey, understand what it is you want and what experiences would most match what you need to continue, and having a good relationship with a mentor will help you get those experiences and develop.
Thanks all everybody for sharing. You've shared so much about your career progression, your time in the Navy and Army, and how you've navigated the career. So really appreciate that. I don't want to lose sight of the life outside of work. And so I guess we'll end with this. Very interested to hear what types of things you do to, relax, recharge, and have a little fun outside of work. And let's go just we'll go in the order that I see you on my screen. So maybe Kelsey, then John, then Ivan, and then we'll end with Ben. All right, Kelsey.
Yeah, so it's been interesting over the last 20 months having to kind of reevaluate what it is that I need to relax and recharge. Definitely used to do a lot of traveling and taking, big chunks of time off a couple of times a year to go spend with family and friends. And that hasn't really been appropriate during the pandemic. So one of the things that we have found, I grew up in the Midwest and came back here when I got out of the military, and honestly hadn't done a lot of Midwest traveling prior to the pandemic. So we've learned a lot of places around Lake Michigan on both the Wisconsin and the Michigan side. And it turns out I like fishing, and I'm not bad at it. I'd never fished before. So doing that with my family, just getting away, giving some dedicated time where you can just totally unplug and relax, has really been, I think, most helpful in these past 2 years for me.
Very fun. And my wife, my son, and I did that road trip all the way around Lake Michigan. My 9-year-old loved being able to show everybody that he went all the way around, and some beautiful places there. John, how about you?
It's definitely been different over the last 20 months. I probably walked more in the last 20 months than any time in my life. My wife and I probably walk every day. We walk with friends. What we ended up doing was we lived in a condo building, and we would bubble with some of our neighbors essentially. And that, it was really got to know our neighbors a lot better and our neighborhood a lot better than I ever thought I would. And a lot of it has to do with, we weren't going to travel or go anywhere. We had plans to go to Portugal in January of 2020. We were going to leave sometime mid 2020, and when everything hit, we just looked at each other and said, nope. And then we were supposed to go to Park City, Utah. Nope. And we haven't been on a plane and have no plans on getting on a plane anytime soon. Really, I'm sure that'll change. But for us, it's really just spending time just out and about, walking, being outside, and not, care about the weather. Obviously, we don't like it when it's raining or snowing, but if it's 30 degrees out, we've got the clothes to be warm, and we just go out for nice walks.
Very nice. Ivan, how about you?
For me, a lot of what is said, I think we all can benefit from. When you're on Zoom, you can spend a lot of hours in the chair. But even those of us who are back in the office find that mostly we're sitting in the office on Zoom all day, and you don't get up. So I do think getting outside every day, taking a walk is really critical. But I think for me, the most important thing is trying to figure out ways to get a little time with my kids and coach T-ball. Both of my kids have started learning baseball, was the sport I was real into, and it's been fun trying to expose them to it.
Great. And Ben?
For me, like everyone else, due to the pandemic, not doing a lot of traveling. So I've been relegated to taking more walks outside, on the trails. If it's not that, spend time trying to get some exercise and working out. And I have 2 young kids, so my daughter's big on anime, so I spend time watching animes together. And my son loves playing Fortnite and FIFA, so a lot of time on the video games playing Fortnite and FIFA with him. So yeah, that's really what I do to unwind. And when I get some free time to myself, not working out or out, on the trail working, is listening to podcasts or audiobooks.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your personal and career progression. So thank you, Ben, John, Kelsey, and Ivan, for just a really good discussion. And as this is the week of Veterans Day, just thank you so much for your service, not only to our country, but in leading our healthcare organizations during the pandemic. I really appreciate, and I know our members will get a lot out of this. For our members, as we wrap up here today, there will be a link posted to fill out an evaluation. You'll also receive an email. And then please visit the First Illinois HFMA.org for great content. I know several of our members today talked about wanting to, get back together after the pandemic. And so we've got a lot of great things coming up for the spring and next summer. Managed care event, accounting and reimbursement, revenue cycle. And then save the date, next October 23rd, 24th, and 25th is our big fall summit, but it's really a Region 7 summit where we'll be joined by chapters throughout Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. With that, thank you so much for attending today's program, and we look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you so much, panel. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Take care.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Good day. Bye.